Hello and welcome to the Michael Mamas Show. I'm your host, Michael Mamas, and we're coming to you from Mount Soma, home of the Sri Someshwara Temple in the mountains of Western North Carolina. Today's podcast, I want to just take a step back here and look at the whole world situation sort of from a hypothetical perspective. And again, I want you to make your own decisions. All I'm really interested in doing in this podcast is presenting the different, or some of the different perspectives and scenarios that are out there. But then you make up your mind, you know. I hope you've all been listening to the news and, like I've said, different channels, different perspectives, because boy, they range wildly, you know. What I'd like to do is let's just imagine a scenario, and you know, if you were going to try to dominate the world, try to conquer the world, how would you go about it? You know, maybe that's even more relevant now than it's been in the past, because, you know, now if there was an out and out conflict between nations, you know, nuclear weapons would destroy the whole globe. But nevertheless, you know, throughout history, there have been a number of attempts to take over nations or whole sections of the globe, but not through war per se, but through, you know, a different kind of war, if you will, and that is to infiltrate the nation from within and break it down, so that, you know, you can then take over on a limited level. You know, I've talked about, for example, the Bolshevik Revolution, where really that was just a bunch of financial gluttons, I want to say, that decided they wanted to take over the banking of Russia. And so they created this whole false world, blaming everything on the Tsar. And Tsar got overthrown, and these guys, these financial wizards, have been controlling banking in Russia, my understanding is, to this day. I remember, you know, I'm old enough to remember that back at the UN, Nikita Khrushchev, I don't know how many of the listeners will remember this, but, you know, he was the leader of Soviet Union at the time. And he was sitting at his desk pounding his shoe. Khrushchev was pounding his shoe on the desk at the United Nations. And he was saying that they were going to overtake the United States from within, bury it from within. Other examples, well, like Venezuela, current history. And there's a whole process. It's been taken to a refined science almost, how to go about doing it. You know, one of the first things they do is they tear down all the statues, you know, degrade, erode away the history, the cultural integrity, and then create separations between groups, like I've talked about in previous podcasts. And then there was the Great Depression. It was a global phenomenon. And the way that was done by intent of the money, by the money, for the money. A bunch of fat cats planned the Great Depression. They created the Great Depression by intent. They even told Joe Kennedy, I think it was 3 months before it happened, take all your money out of the market because we're going to crash it. And they do it because the market crashes. They buy everything up for pennies on the dollar. And then the whole world economy comes back and they're wealthier than they were. Not that they even needed any money. And there just seems to be no regard. There is no regard among some of these individuals for human life. You know, there's a guy, I don't know how many of you may have heard of Jim Sinclair. He's an investment guy. And evidently he knows a lot of these big wigs. There's this idea that there's some really wealthy people that are in the background, and they're really the people that are controlling the world. I don't know to what degree that's true, but he talked about those people, and he knew those people. And he said, you don't even want to know them. They consider themselves beyond regular human beings, and they have no regard for other human beings. At that level, there's a group, and I'm not saying everybody who's wealthy like that, but there's a group that they kind of view other human beings, like rats. They don't really put the same value on human life that they put on their own little oligarchy at the top and the lives of those people. And I remember he was even saying that those people even believe that it is their right to be on that level. They feel like, eventually when they die, they will reincarnate back into that same position. It's kind of like their birthright. And so those are the kind of people you're dealing with. And I think the corruption, not just on that level, but on all levels, and I've seen it. The corruption is so extreme that people are unable to believe that it's even true. Even the legal system, not all attorneys, but the extent some attorneys will go to win. It has nothing to do with what's legal, what's right, what's moral. It's all about winning. And they coerce, they threaten, they do whatever just to win. And you see that on all levels, all the way to the very top. So the question becomes then, if, the Chinese, now it used to be the Russians, back with Khrushchev and all that, but now it's the Chinese. It's pretty clear that, and it's been stated that the Chinese want to, take over this country, take over the world. They go into third world countries that have a lot of mineral rights and things, and they'll go in there and give them a free infrastructure, because then they take over. And it's all planned, global domination. And so the question becomes, if you were in that position, if you were, the Communist Party that's running China, and wanted to go about doing what Khrushchev said, destroying the nation from within. And there's a history of that, isn't there? In many different nations. But how would you go about it? What would you do? And again, this is all hypothetical. I'm not saying it's happening, but I think there's a lot of evidence that is compelling enough to make us wonder. First thing you do is divide people, right? I talked about that. Create categories of people and polarize them against each other, so that people are no longer individuals, they're part of a group. Like blacks, whites, vaccinated, unvaccinated, Jews, Christians, and then you start labeling races. White supremacists. All whites are white supremacists. People say, and so there's that. And then there's also this whole thing about eroding away cultural integrity. It's no longer Christmas. That been attempted to eliminate that. Because what about the other religions? See, all these things have intellectual justifications to them. Like I like to say, you can justify anything with the intellect, and people do. And see, that's the thing too, is there are a lot of people out there that are really smart. But sadly, a high percentage of those really smart people have basically lost their connection with, what I've talked about as the unified field, with the earth, with Mother Earth, with nature, with what's natural, their own humanity. Sometimes people say they've lost their soul, but they get caught up in their little ivory towers of intellectualization. And so they decide that, their little group at the top, their little clique that's, is, the sophisticated ones. Well, and then what do they talk about? The flyover. Oh, they talk about how those people basically live on the East and West Coast, and the whole flyover thing is a bunch of how do they put it? Religious fanatics with their guns, and I forget how they put it. But, again, another form of polarization. And this idea that there's an elite group at the top that's smarter than everybody else and has the answers. And they think if they could just control the world, control the nation, then the world would be a better place. And the way, you see, I don't even think that a lot of the people that are on one side or the other side really get, what's going on behind the scenes. Because, they convince a mass mentality, give it a momentum of a mass mentality. And the real intention behind creating those mentalities isn't really about right and wrong or about what they even believe is good or bad. It's about creating division in the country, breaking down the nation, destroying the country from within, destroying the nation from within. So you get rid of patriotism. And again, these things, you can take it from either side. For example, the border. Some people, and I'm not going to say, it's up to you to decide, but some people say, borders, they're arbitrary lines in the sand, how can you keep people out? That's not right. But other people say, well, if you don't have a border, then, the Chinese are pouring fentanyl in, all these drugs, and the non-documented, as I'm trying to say, politically correct way, are coming in. They're not even testing them for the virus, not even making them wear masks, busing them all over the nation, wherever. So there's an obvious contradiction there, because everybody else has to get vaccinated, everybody else has to get masks, or at least they're certainly pushing them to. And so what's going on? It doesn't make any sense. And so the point is, what's the underlying motivation? We have to ask ourselves that. You have to ask yourself that. What's the underlying motivation to all this stuff? And again, people are really smart, and they can justify anything with the intellect, and they do. And they convince people of it. And if they can take hold of at least a portion of the mass mentality, then they can use those people unknowingly. These people think they're doing the right thing. Oh yeah, why should there be boundaries, for example? Why should there be borders? But really, the underlying motivation of the people that are creating that is quite different. There are just so many examples, and I think it's good. Everywhere where there's like religion, everywhere where there's a debate, you can take a look at it from this perspective, and I think it becomes interesting, at least, if not insightful. It becomes very interesting. Religion. Okay, great. It's easy to take pot shots at religion. What do you mean Jesus is driving, or what do you mean God in heaven? Where in heaven? And so they start to create a mockery of religion, and what that certainly throws out the baby with the bathwater. Now, I, as a spiritual teacher, have spoken about, we need a more rational understanding of all of that, because it has to make sense. We live in an age where things have to make sense. They have to be logical, but there is a logic to spirituality. There is a logic to religion, which is why I've said in the past, I like listening to these Baptist radio stations, because everything they say, there's a deeper meaning to it, a deeper understanding of it. And to me, that's essential. Otherwise, it makes no sense. But what they do is they don't look for the deeper meaning. They look at the surface and oh, well, if it's God's will, well, I give whole lectures on God's will, and God's will comes in two forms, free will and predetermination. karma and freedom, and but if you just throw out, oh, it's God's will, it sounds like hocus pocus. Or sporting events. Oh, thank God we won. God's on your side is where people go. But there is a deeper meaning. But all those things are lectures. And so basically then they wrote away the whole religious foundation. And religion, in its essence, has to do with what? Living in harmony with Mother Nature. Living in harmony with that one thing that's the source of everything. And so we rode that away. Because it's interesting to me how even people who don't have that rigorous intellectual understanding, and it doesn't even need to make sense. Why? Because they can feel it in their soul, which is beautiful. But nevertheless, they start to undermine it. And I see families here, they come and the parents bring the kids, and then you see some kids and it doesn't make any sense to them, and it's a shame. But the world needs that. That's another subject that I talk about that at length. The whole transsexual thing, boy, if you wanted to undermine a nation, there's another way to do it, isn't it? Create a mentality that allows fully intact males to go into public showers and take showers with your daughter. I mean, come on. I'm trying to be unopinionated here, but with that one in particular, it just becomes difficult. So forgive me. Destroying the family unit. I think you probably heard about teachers who tell the children, don't tell your parents what we're talking about when they talk about critical race theory and things like that. What's another way? And this is pretty interesting, I think, because it's something that you've seen, like even in The Godfather, one of the Godfather, I forget, I think it may be the second one or maybe not, where they're talking about all we need now is to be able to put a man in the White House. So we create the president. So the president works for us. And I'm not saying that's what's going on, but there is an argument out there, and there's a certain degree of logic to it. I mean, is all this true about President Biden? I don't know. But according to that, he made all this money from the Chinese, and his son made all this money from the Chinese. And if all that came to the forefront, how, he'd be impeached and worse, And so what does that mean? They end up making him a puppet if all that's true. I'm not saying it is. You have to decide for yourself. But if it is true, then if he doesn't dance to their tune and do what they want, then he goes to prison. His son goes to prison. So they got a puppet. That's an argument. I'm not saying it's the case, but I think we have to hear these things. Why? Because they're out there. And maybe some of these things that we're citing as one side of the argument versus the other side of the argument, maybe some of them are true. But here's the other thing. If they're true or not, it erodes away the integrity of the nation. You're destroying a nation. You're destroying a country from within. And that's certainly going on. All the different moral values, they're all being questioned. Everything is being undermined. The drug culture feeds that. The ivory tower academicians who are, they probably never even ran a Kool-Aid stand, but they're sitting there with their ivory tower thinking about the way the world should be. Even, again, I don't mean to push buttons, but John Lennon with that Imagine, that song. If you really listen to the words, I mean, where did that come from? I mean, it's just not real. Now, yeah, in some utopian society where human beings were completely different than how they are, wouldn't that be cool, I guess, But it's all Lucy in the sky with diamonds, It's just, but again, that kind of mentality and capturing the mentality of the people that follow and were part of that hippie movement or whatever you want to say, it undermines the nation to some degree. I'm not saying it's all bad, but I'm saying there's that component. The whole COVID virus thing. Oh my goodness! I don't know if you're all seeing this or not, but I get bombarded. I get at least a couple of links people send me every single day. It seems at least a couple. Where they have another doctor, and some of these guys are really board certified, highly accredited immunology experts from Stanford, I think Harvard. There's a couple really well credentialed from Texas, and they're all saying, the dangers of the vaccine and how they're not coming out there with it. Is that true? You decide for yourself. But it's being buried, what are they doing? At least it's good to just know about it and then make up your mind, Gosh, I really would like you to think about it. It almost seems like every controversy that's out there. Afghanistan, there's another one. Horrible what happened. 13 people. But, even, what's her name? Saki or whatever. I'm spacing out. Anyway, what's her name?
Hisaki or whatever.
Yeah, right. Even she was saying that, oh no, we did the right thing. And President Biden is even saying, no, we did the right thing. We did it just the right way. It had to happen this way. And then there's the other side. Oh, we should have at least pulled our citizens out and pulled the Afghanistan people that were supportive of us, pulled them out and pulled out all that equipment first. And then taking the military out.
What a concept. I think that's bringing up some things, though, that, people are starting to wake up because to some of these things, because staunch supporters of Biden that I know in the area here are now starting to where they can't defend any of some of these things anymore from him, where they used to be super pro, Yeah,
and I'm trying to do my best. I'm not very good at it because some of these things to me are just so, like the Afghanistan situation, so overtly obvious. But I'd really encourage people to make up their own mind
of course.
On all these things, it's interesting that the Supreme Court just, because all the illegals are undocumented or whatever, pouring in through the border, the Supreme Court just ruled 6-3 that they have to stay in Mexico when they apply for asylum. They can't just come in and get turned loose in the country. And there's a lot of pushback against that. All these people, you have to let them in, and why do we have to let them in, and free health care and all that. But I found it interesting because evidently the Supreme Court, how they do an opinion after they make a decision. Evidently the opinion was quite curt and brief and almost not very typical. They didn't go into an extensive legal discussion of it. They just said, no, you can't do it, This whole thing about smart too, I think it's important, there are plenty of smart people out there, but just because you're smart doesn't mean that you're coming from a place that's connecting from the depth of your soul, the place of real wisdom. There's a difference between wise and smart. And the trouble is, if somebody's really, really smart, then they can really spin things with an intellectual justification, and they can hook people by the nose and lead them in a direction. And once they get a momentum of a mass mentality going, that's a very formidable thing, a very powerful thing. And that's what's being done, you know. Scott, Adrian, do you guys have anything you want to add to this whole thing?
Nope.
No,
All right.
that was, yeah.
Not seeing anything.
So, and the pharmaceutical companies, I'll bring this one up too. This is an important one. I understand that the vaccines for the virus has created 5 new billionaires from CEOs or heads of pharmaceutical companies. The sheer money they're making in this world where so many live of by and for the money. I mean, is that why? Is that why they're not letting people, these doctors speak from Stanford and these guys in Texas and Harvard and all that? Is that why they're not letting them speak and say their arguments against the vaccine? If you haven't seen those things, take a look. You might just say, oh, those guys are crazy. But consider their credentials and consider how many of them are coming forward and ask yourself, what's their motivation? And also these therapies for the when people get the virus. They go to the doctor and the doctor says, well, go home, and when you can't breathe anymore, come, we'll put you in the hospital. When there are therapies that work, evidently they work. At least that's what these doctors are saying. But the good news, here's my opinion. My opinion is the good news is that the whole thing has gotten so crazy. It's gotten so ridiculous that people have had it. People are waking up. People are saying, you know, they want to take a deeper look. They want to decide for themselves. They no longer want that ring through their nose where they're being led around because somebody has overtaken the momentum of the mass mentality. And what that's going to do is it's going to compel people to look deeper to a place of inner wisdom. And that place of inner wisdom, functioning in harmony with that, we call that functioning in harmony with natural law, the nature of life. Inalienable rights. People have inalienable rights. And we're getting to the point now where people do not want them trampled. They realize that they've been trampled over, maybe with such finesse and artistry that they didn't even realize that that's what's happening. But they're like, no, we're not going to do it anymore. And see, the funny thing is, if you're on extreme one side or the extreme other side, you can point your finger at the opposite side and say, well, they're the ones that are not living in harmony with nature. We're the ones that are living in harmony with nature. The one side will say, well, it's natural to have sovereignty for a nation. Otherwise, you just have anarchy. The other side says, well, it's natural to not have borders up because they're just arbitrary lines in the sand. And they're all like that. So you can justify anything with the intellect. And what I'm really appealing to you is to look at the place that lies deeper than both of those perspectives. And then you come from that place with your perspective. But before you can really do that on these different issues, like the virus or whatever, you have to know both sides, I think, and weigh them from within your own being. And that's what this whole thing is about. But the whole thing is so crazy. It's all imploding. It's all unraveling. And I'll tell you where it's going to shake out is a golden age of wisdom is going to emerge. It's happening. And so it's almost like the extremes have become so ridiculous, they've overplayed their hand. People look at it and say, okay, none of this is making any sense. I got to look deeper. I got to find it within my own sense. What are my real values that come from within the depth of my soul? And let's build from there. And that's going to be the foundation for a golden age. Common sense. There's smart, there's common sense, and there's wisdom. And the gateway to wisdom is through common sense. All right, I think that's it. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk with you again next week.